to the podcast. Really excited to have you here to talk some stories, talk about some Telegraph Creek days. So, without further ado, my father, Patrick Edward Armstrong, welcome.
And thank you, and I'm happy to be here. This is great. Really appreciate the opportunity. So you mentioned Telegraph Creek, and Telegraph Creek is a town in the northwest corner of British Columbia, just south of the Yukon, 100 miles due east of Juneau, Alaska. So it gives you a bit of the geography. You can kind of think about where it's located. It's a long way away. I'm not going to talk a lot about why we went there because that's a whole other story, but what I would like to do is share some of the more interesting kind of things that happened to us. And this, of course, was before your day. You hadn't come onto the scene yet, Jeremiah.
So this was like 1970, 71?
Yeah. And you were
I was training hard to win that race, right? You know.
Yeah. So we were staying. Your mother and I and your older brother Matthew. We were staying at a place called 9 Mile. Willie Campbell and Nellie Campbell's ranch. Willie called it Half-Breed Ranch, and he'd always laugh when he said that. And this was in the summer of 1971.
So my brother was like a year old?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, a little over a year old at that point, yeah.
And one of the things about living in Telegraph Creek is there was very little in the way of work. There was about, maybe 600-700 people that lived in the community. Most of them were Taltan people, and there wasn't a lot of commercial activity. People would typically work, if they worked at all, in drill camps off in the mountains, guide outfitting. Which all seasonal work, and
so you just bed down like at the end, like in winter. Was it just like you just basically hid and ate supplies until spring came, kind of thing, or
more or less? And so there was one job that was a good gig to have in Telegraph Creek in those days, and it was reliable. It was, again, seasonal. It just happened in the summertime, but it was reliable, and it paid well. And it was called the snagging crew. And the job of the snagging crew was to travel on the Stikine River from Telegraph Creek 160 miles down to the boundary with the U.S. And to eliminate the snags in the navigation channels on the river, because that Stikine River had been the major travel corridor into the Yukon before the Alaska Highway was built during the Second World War.
So what did they use? I mean, it's a really fast-flowing river, so how did they get up the river?
At riverboats, and they looked just like you would imagine a riverboat looking with a big paddle wheel on it.
Okay.
And
they just churn their way up, steam engines pumping, and
and Telegraph Creek was the head of navigation. You couldn't go any further than that because above Telegraph Creek, the Stikine is funneled through a canyon, a long, narrow canyon. And
I'd just like to interject and say that Jackaroo finally climbed onto the chair.
I see that. That's a good boy. Yeah.
So is Glenora by Three Sisters as far as you can go with the boat, or was it above Telegraph Creek? Because I remember there's like that step that in the canyon above Telegraph Creek. There's like a step all the way across the river, right?
Yeah, no, you could. Head of navigation was Telegraph Creek. Originally, it was Glenora, and during the gold rush days in 1898, there was a big town in Glenora, 10,000 people, all making their way into the gold fields of the Yukon. And one of the things a lot of folks don't know is that they always think of the gold fields and the Yukon. They think about the Chilkoot Pass, and going from Alaska into the Yukon over the Chilkoot Pass, and that was a major corridor. But the other major corridor was the one up the Stikine River, as far as Telegraph Creek, and then overland with pack trains from Telegraph Creek, 75 miles to Dease Lake. And then they would go back onto boats, and they had tunnel boats on the Dease Lake and Dease River, and you go all the way into the Pele Yukon. So that's, a whole lot of those sourdoughs, that's the way they were going, was Wrangell, Alaska, Telegraph Creek, Dease Lake, Dease River.
Wildness, eh?
Yeah.
Wild country.
To Dawson Creek.
Savage country, for sure.
Not Dawson Creek, but to Thingamabob Creek.
Another creek. Oh, my God, not another one of these creeks, yeah. So we were talking about
Dawson City.
You and my mom and my 1-year-old brother came to Telegraph, and you were staying with Willie Williams.
Willie Campbell.
Willie Campbell. Okay, Willie Campbell.
You met Willie Campbell. He died before you were born.
Okay, so this is like an old timer when.
Yeah, Willie Campbell was an old man at that point, and he was an interesting guy because the history has it that he spent 14 years hauling the mail in the wintertime from Telegraph Creek to Atlan with dog team.
Yeah, there's photos of that on the Telegraph Creek people's page. Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, so we were living there, fishing with Willie in the river. We used to help him net the fish and then pack the fish up out of the canyon, and then take the fish to the fish house and clean them and dry them and so forth and so on. But anyway, that's not the story. That's a whole other story in and of itself.
Okay.
So the story is how I got my first job in Telegraph Creek, and my first job in Telegraph Creek was I got hired to go on the snagging crew. And the snagging crew at that point consisted of the boss, Gus Adamson, Herbert Hawkins, and Roy Kwok, and then me.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but Gus Adamson's kind of like a Paul Bunyan legendary human being of that place in that era.
Well, if you looked at him, you wouldn't think of what leapt into your mind. Wouldn't be Paul Bunyan.
Yeah.
It would be Popeye.
Popeye.
That's what he looked like. And he was from England, and he had come over to Canada, and out to the western part of Canada. And first of all, he was on the prairies, and then he went to British Columbia, and it was during that whole time when there was gold fever and all kinds of gold rushes going on and one thing and another, and he ended up in Telegraph Creek, and he was this is where he's like a legendary guy because he did everything. He built a sawmill, and he sawed timber. The boats we used on the snagging crew they were wooden boats, river boats. One was 22 feet long, the other one was 30 feet long, and they were built with spruce planks that he had milled in his sawmill. And he'd taken over the job of the foreman or the boss of the snagging crew. And he'd been doing that for a few years when he came out to 9 Mile, and he said, "Do you want to go to work?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'd like to have a job."
So you were headhunted, so to speak, right?
That's right. Yeah.
He's like, I think I saw a young, fit-looking white dude up there, and I'm gonna go and get me.
Yeah.
Gonna get me. Yeah. So he came and recruited you.
Yeah. And
did my mom give you like a really approving look? Like, was she like really impressed with you when that happened?
She was pretty impressed with the fact that we were going to make some money because we were broke.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, right? Like she's like, "Well, okay, yeah."
So so that summer I worked on the snagging crew for 2 trips, and then the following summer I worked on the snagging crew for maybe 3 trips. And by a trip, I mean you would go down the river for 3 weeks and do the work that you were doing, which consisted of basically two elements to the job. One was dynamiting snags and snag piles in the river, and the other was falling timber off the cut banks to get it off the stump so it wouldn't hang up and make a snag. Remember, this is you're keeping the navigation channels open. Now, the interesting thing is, by the time I came along and I got this job, there weren't any more riverboats coming up, but it was it was kind of a sovereignty thing for Canada. This is our river. We're going to maintain the navigation on it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the government was paying for a service that wasn't really needed anymore, except that it basically showed that we were there doing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that would be exactly right.
But I mean, people did use the river, right? There were boats coming up and down the river.
Yeah, but they were
the
smaller river boats and stuff, which didn't
require.
You could make your way around and pass snags and that kind of thing. But anyway, it was a kind of an anachronism. It wasn't a job that was really needed anymore, but it was continued, which was fine with me because it didn't matter to me whether or not they needed it. What mattered to me was I had a job, and a pretty amazing job for a young man who was in his early 20s.
Yeah, absolutely. Like badassery, right? Like athletic, super athletic, hard work, dangerous, got to be on your game.
So we would travel from Telegraph Creek in the boats, and we would go down past what they call Kluchman Canyon, which was a small canyon on the river, and you'd get below that was where the river started braiding out. This is a huge river. It's a big, big river. It also happens to be the fastest major river in North America, like the flow of the water.
Yeah, I remember it hums.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
river.
there's like a thing in your bones if you were born next to it, right?
Yeah.
Like, or lived next to it for a long time. And I definitely, when there was that really cool video that somebody a couple of years ago did of the Stikine with all the drone footage, and they were really good sound. They mic'd the river, and it was just like immediately it was like, oh, I know that.
Yeah. So we would get down below Kluchman. Kluchman was maybe 40 miles or so below Telegraph Creek. And then from there, we would start our work. And we had camps along the river that we would stay in. And the camps consisted of each one had a little cabin. That's where Gus stayed, and had a kitchen in it. And Gus liked to do the cooking, so he got to do the cooking. And then the rest of us, we stayed in wall tents. And rain or shine. And so we would get down there. We get down to the first camp. And I have to think a bit about the names of the various camps. They all had their names. But anyway, we get to the first camp that we're going to work out of. Pull the boats up on the riverbank. Get settled into the camp. And then the next day, we would begin our work. And our work always consisted of, first and foremost, dynamiting dangerous snag piles. And the way we would do that is we would have cut these, what we called pike poles. And they were basically spruce saplings that were maybe 2 inches diameter on the butt end, and then tapers up. Peel the bark off them, all the little knots and nubblies of the limbs. Drill a hole using a brace and bit. Drill a hole in the fat end. Take a 12-inch spike, cut the head off it. On the pointy end, hammer it down on an anvil. So now you have a spike that's kind of starting to resemble a spear. And then you'd take a hammer and chisel, and you'd on the butt end, You would make
Notches?
you'd make notches that lifted. Basically, what they did is they created some barbs
Okay.
on the spike. Then you had because you got the hole drill in the pike pole.
Yeah.
You got your nail prepared. Then you take a gun barrel.
Okay.
This is an actual gun barrel, sawed off chunk of gun barrel.
Okay.
You put that over the end of the spike, and you hammer on that to drive the spike into the pike pole.
Okay.
Now you've got this thing that looks like a spear. It's probably 6-8 feet long.
So it's a spear.
Yeah.
Yeah, just you're not intending it to stab anybody, so it's not quite. You had a spear, right?
And so we'd make up a bunch of those, load them into the boat, and then we'd go along the riverbank in the right place, and we'd cut off this red osier dogwood whips. And they'd be, say, on the butt end, they'd be up to an inch in diameter, and they'd be as long as the pike poles.
Okay.
And you'd have as many of those as you had pike poles.
Okay.
So you got your pike pole, you got your push down stick.
So we have one big sticky thing with a spear end, and one equally long, thinner thing with no spear end. Right. Okay. We're double fisting.
Yes.
We're ready to fend off the attack. The attack. Yes. Man the pikes, gentlemen.
And then we'd take a dynamite, and this was stick dynamite. It was always 40% foresight. And you'd take, and I can't remember exactly the number of sticks, but it would end up being, when they were stood up on end, they would make a roll that was probably 8 inches.
What's a stick? Like a roll of quarters, or like an inch diameter or something like that?
Inch diameter.
So like 30 probably to a 20,
yeah.
30, yeah.
Take those and you'd wrap them up with tape, and then the other element of what I call the bomb that was really important was the bail that you would put on. It was made out of telegraph wire.
Okay.
Now, telegraph wire was everywhere up in that country, because before the telephone cable was laid across the Atlantic Ocean, they were building a telegraph that was going to go up through British Columbia, across into Alaska, and then across the Bering Sea to hook up to Russian telegraph.
And then all the way to Europe.
And all the way to Europe, yeah. And that job was almost complete when it got shut down, because the cable was laid. Now it became redundant.
Yes.
The whole program was now redundant. And anyhow, as a result of that, there was all this telegraph wire. And telegraph wire is essentially a galvanized alloy wire that's probably 1/8 of an inch in diameter.
So this is like to send like
exactly Morse code.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Dot dash.
Yeah.
And that we used it for everything in Telegraph Creek. This telegraph wire was all over the place, and you'd collect it. You'd use it for make hooks. It wasn't really good for securing stuff all that well, because it was pretty heavily annealed, and didn't bend really well. Like it was stiff.
Yes.
So anyway, you'd have your roll of dynamite sticks. You'd make take a link to the telegraph wire and bend it into what looks now like a bale for a bucket.
Okay.
And you'd tape that around the dynamite. And now you've essentially got something, the way I like to explain it, was kind of like a tea bucket. Boom.
Yep.
So you can picture that?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Are you smiling at this point because you know you're about to blow some shit up?
Oh, yeah. This is exciting. You take two of the sticks that are in the center of the roll, sticks of dynamite that are in the center of the roll, and you put blasting caps in them that's attached to a 3-foot safety fuse. Now, a 3-foot safety fuse means that when you light it on the one end, you got 3 minutes
Okay.
before it reaches the cap, detonates the cap, and blows up the bomb. So that's your 3 minutes is a long time.
Yeah, you can swim really fast if necessary.
Yeah. Upstream.
Upstream. Yeah, true that, yeah.
So now you got your bomb, 2 fuses coming out of it. You've got your push down sticks and you got your pike poles. And these are all loaded in the boat, in the bow of the boat. And you go off to where your snag or your snag pile is. And exactly how you approached it and what you did depending on the situation. But let's just imagine that it's a big snag. So a tree that's anchored in the river bottom with its root wad.
Yes.
And sticking out of the water, looking proud and right there ready to plow into the hull of a boat.
Yes.
So you go up to this thing and you pull up alongside it with the boat and you're pointing upstream. And you put the bow of the boat against the snag, and the guy running the boat, who was me, has to hold it there. And then the guy running the bomb, which was always Gus because he had the blasting ticket, he would be up there. He would take the pike pole and he would probe around on the snag until he could get the pike pole as far down as he could get it and still be able to hold on to it. And then he had a big birch mallet. Just a mallet made out of a chunk of birch.
Cool, like just a big wooden mallet.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom.
And he'd bang that.
That's badass,
pole.
right? That's part of that epic legendary shit.
Yeah.
Right?
He'd bang that pike pole into the snag and until you can see just the top of it sticking out of the water.
Okay.
And shivering away there from the current. And remember, this is the fastest.
Yeah, how
river.
fast is this Keene flowing at this point? Like,
It's flowing fast. I don't know what.
that's I'm going to find out. Will you continue the story here? I'm going to go and.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So now you got the pike pole set. Then you take the bomb and you take one of those push-down sticks made from the red osier dogwood, and you take a piece of string and you tie that to the bail, the butt of that push-down stick to the bail of the bomb. And then you take the bail and you put it over the pike pole and you push it down under the water. Oh, no, hold it. We forgot something. We had to do one other thing first.
Okay.
We had to light the fuses on the bomb because you can't light them underwater.
That's true. But they will burn underwater.
They'll burn underwater,
okay.
yeah, because they got manganese in them. So you light the bomb, put the bail over the pike pole, take the push-down stick, push the bomb down until you get it as far down as you can push it with your push-down stick. And you take another piece of string that you've been holding in your mouth, and you use that to wrap the push-down stick and tie it to the pike pole. And then the next thing you do is you get out of Dodge. You get out of there because...
Now, is there a sense of urgency, or are you like... Because you had to light the fuse, and then you had to set the charge. So that's already eating your 3 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So as you slide... So the charge... Get this right. The charge gets slid down the pike pole?
The bomb gets slid down the pike pole. The fuses are burning.
Okay, and you're pushing that down with the other stick, with the alder, right?
Red osier dogwood.
Red osier dogwood. There we go. Yeah. So you're using the red osier dogwood. Down it goes. Boom. And now what? Like you have a minute. You have 30 seconds. At what point?
Let's say it's going to take you a good 2 to 2.5 minutes to get the bomb set. So now you've got 30 seconds to a minute to get out of there with the boat.
And how far do you need to go?
You need to go as far as you can. And the other thing is that you don't want to go downriver.
No, because then all the stuff comes.
Well, because maybe the bomb broke loose and it's floating downriver.
Oh, yeah, I never thought about that part, right? Yeah, that could be an issue.
So you always go upriver.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons you hold the boat upriver when you're
So you're like on the engine basically the entire time,
Mm-hmm.
so you know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
And you kind of know where you're going to go. You've already scoped it out. You
Yeah.
can see a clear path.
Do you have any? Did you ever? Do you remember any close calls or like oh fucks or something epic?
No, that never happened to me.
No, Gus was the man, I guess, right? Like,
Yeah.
and you're a boat driver. You're the one driving the boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've always been the driver, right? Really?
That's it. Yeah, it's me, the driver.
Yeah, I mean,
So then you get out of there and it goes off. And if it was set well and everything, then that snag is gone and it floats away. Like I say, there's lots of different circumstances. Like on big snag piles, we might go back 3, 4, 5, 6 times setting bombs to get the snag pile to break up. So that's one part of the job.
that's the fun part. That's like the.
Well, that's epic, as you say.
Well, it's just such a huge river. It's moving so fast. You're playing with dynamite. You're young. You're driving the boat.
Yeah.
Right. Like what? So, I mean, obviously, epic would not be the lingo that you would have thought when you were in that space. Probably that wasn't a common word. I don't know. Maybe, but what were you thinking in that space when you're like, cruising? You're driving the boat down. So you're driving everywhere the boat goes. Right? Now, are you sitting in the back on a tiller or do you have a steering wheel?
No, it's a tiller. We had 33 and a third horsepower Johnson outboards
Okay.
on those boats.
Just two or one?
One.
One per boat, eh?
Yeah, and then you got a couple of oars in case you need.
Just because you're fucking, yeah, you're not rowing upstream for sure.
Yeah. One word. Wow.
Wow.
Or 2 words. Holy fuck.
Holy fuck. And then maybe 3, holy fuck, wow. So how many summers did you do the snagging crew for?
2.
2.
I did 2 trips that first summer and 3 the next summer. And we made good money because, it was a federal government job, so you got like a good wage.
What was a good wage in 1972?
It would have been like, $10 an hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
is
that. Yeah.
$8. Either way, that's just like considering family allowance checks between, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Lard, $2.06, right?
Yeah. Anyhow, so the other thing we would do was, as I said before, was remove the big timber from the cut banks. Now, what puts the wood in the river is the river's constantly moving around and it's constantly eroding the banks as it changes its attitude. And then you've got these trees that have been growing on this bank for a couple, 300 years.
Yeah.
They're mostly spruce and cottonwood, and they're big.
Yeah, so like 60, 70, 100 feet taller?
Oh, yeah, tall like that. And then diameter-wise at the stump, they would be like 6, 8 feet.
So this is big timber.
Yes, big timber. And
Old growth.
Old growth.
So you were cutting old growth. Oh, my God. It was 1972, over hill, over dale. And anyways.
But, in order to get at the timber to cut it down, to fall it, and we had chainsaws. These were Canadian was the make of the saws, and they were big, with long bars on them. But in order to get there, to do it, you had to clear out all of this undergrowth. And you can imagine it's like a jungle on those banks. It's a heavy rainfall area. There's all kinds of vegetation. Alder, birch, red osier dogwood, devil's club.
Always the best, always the best.
Yeah. And so you got to cut that stuff out of the way so you can get into the tree and fall it. Now, Gus was a really interesting guy. We called him Fussy Gus because everything he did, he wanted it done a particular way. And you weren't going to do it any other way than the way he wanted it done. And he wanted it neat, and he wanted it clean. And so we'd get onto the cut bank where we were going to fall the timber. We'd scramble up there, and each of us had an axe, single-bitted axe, a sharpening block, which you could put it in and then sharpen your axe with a file, a flat file, water jug. I don't think we ever used machete. It was just basically the axe. And now you'd brush out the area you're going to fall the timber, but it wasn't just a matter of kind of brushing out to the tree and around the tree. Gus was fussy, and he wanted the whole bank brushed out. Right back maybe 100 feet from the bank back into the timber. You know, however far back you were going to be falling the trees, that's how far back you'd cut the brush. And then as you cut it down, and this is all done with an axe. This was not, we weren't using, the only thing that power saws were used for was the falling of the timber. And so we were cutting stuff that was, you know, an inch in diameter up to stuff that was 6 or 8 inches in diameter.
So how long were you working? Like, what was your day like? Like, where you're out cutting? Like, I'm guessing is he putting pace on you? Is he putting a pace on you, or is it?
We'd work 8 or 10 hours.
Swinging an axe for 8 or 10 hours.
Swinging an axe, yeah.
Pulling brush. Swinging an axe.
Throwing it in the river.
Good thing you were 20 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'd get all that brush out of there, and Gus would look to make sure that we'd pretty well made a straight line, that you could take a surveyor's transit, and that's how straight that line would be. And all the big trees on the riverside of the line would be felled, and get everything in the back. You didn't worry about it, but it had to be nice and neat, right down to, like, I'll never forget him demanding that we knock over the goosegrass, which is an herbaceous plant that grows in those environments.
So was he like an ex-military guy? Was he like?
No, he had, if I remember right, he had been in England. He had been a warehouseman.
Okay.
And he was strong as an ox, a little guy, but strong as an ox. And that's from all those years of packing barrels of molasses or whatever.
And at some point, he decided to no more with England and came to Canada. Sorry, just a second.
Jeremiah's screwing around with his mic.
Mic check, mic check. You know, these are the super expensive $170 piece from Amazon.
Yes.
If you don't hold your mouth just right, they might just fall apart. But that's okay. They seem to be working well. We seem to be in full function here.
So anyway, we'd brush it out, and you might have I don't know 100 yards or so of this bank that you were gonna cut up to 100 feet back. I'm avoiding switching between metric and imperial measure here just because it gets confusing if you do that. Anyway, and then we would fall the timber. And Gus was also the faller. He liked to do the falling.
So basically, he was like the knight, and you were his squires, and you got to use the fucking axe. And if you touched the chainsaw, that was not gonna.
Yeah, it was very rare that you ended up. But that's fine. I mean, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you can kill yourself pretty dead falling these big old trees, and in the cottonwood especially, because they tend to be hollow in the inside. And one thing I'll never forget is that you cut into a cottonwood, make an undercut in it, and when you knock that wedge out from the undercut, the water just comes out of it like in a torrent, it's like a fire hydrant. And anyway, so you'd fall the timber, and here's the deal. This wasn't timber that was going to a sawmill or anything. This was timber that was going in the river. But what you've accomplished is you've gotten it off the stump, so it's less likely to hang up.
So basically, when that place goes into the river, when it sloughs into the river, it's a stump ball separated from the big.
Yeah, from the trunk of the tree. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it much less likely to snag. And
I'd say probably 75% of the big trees were cottonwood. The other 25% were spruce. Um,
So did you fall trees as well? Like were you ever on the chainsaw?
a little bit, but not much. I mean, mostly that was Gus's.
Was that your first time with a chainsaw, like learning a chainsaw? Because that's people would be thinking like it's not your still, you see down at Home Depot. That's it's like a big piece of machinery with a long bar, one person, but really two people.
Yeah, well, they actually we never used them, but we had 2-person chainsaws in the tool crib,
Yeah.
which is basically you got a handle on the end of the bar, accompanied by the handle that's on the engine.
Big old machines either way, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that was the process. And like I said already, we'd work 8-10 hours a day. Then you put everything back in the boats and you go back to camp. So it was just, hard labor. And this is summertime, so it's getting hot during the day.
Black flies, mosquitoes.
Black flies and mosquitoes, yeah. Now, one other little story I like to tell, because depending on your sense of humor, this is pretty damn funny. So when you were cutting on the cut bank, what you would do is you'd start in your patch, you get to the end of it, and then you go up and you get in front of the guy ahead of you. So you're sort of leapfrogging your way along. So you're not in each other's way, but you keep things moving.
Yeah, so you have your area. So how wide of a swath are you cutting on?
Well, it'd be like I said, 75 to 100 feet.
No, but like how wide of a swath? Like, so how much is your work face, your work area?
Well, how long?
No, so you're working right, like in rows, basically. Horizontal to the river or vertical to the river?
Parallel.
Parallel to the river. Okay, so how wide is your work area? So,
well, you'd work from the front to the back and forward. You're moving 3 directions, or 2 directions, because you're going from the front to the back and forward.
Yes, but how wide is your work area before you take another bite?
Until it's done. I'm trying to explain to you. You cut back 75 to 100 feet from the bank of the river.
Yes, but how? Sorry.
And then you're just your patch.
Yeah.
Is maybe, I don't know, maybe 50, 75 feet, and then it's the next guy's patch starts.
Okay, so you're doing. Oh, I see. So you have 75 feet deep to however far you need to go back. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out, like the workspace, So how much are you clearing at a time of this?
This is a whiteboard exercise at this point.
Yeah, I think maybe we went a little bit deep to there. So here's the river. Here's the river. Here's your area that needs to be cut. And you're cutting it like this.
And forward.
Yes. But so he's going to cut back to here. You're going to finish before him. So you're going to go here and start here. He's going to go there. So I'm just wondering, this area, how wide is your workspace?
That's fucking irrelevant.
Okay, now that we've finished that whiteboard exercise, you're going to tell me about you cutting these.
So I'm thinking that it was me and Herbert and Gus. Roy Kwok wasn't with us at that time. So it's me and Herbert's just in front of me. And I go to move ahead of him. And I realize that in the area that he's cut, there's a little chunk of brush that's sticking out. And I'm thinking to myself, Gus is not going to be happy with this. Because you're supposed to be straight, remember? It's supposed to be like a straight line. And Herbert looks at me and he kind of gives me a shushing, don't say anything,
right,
signal. Okay. And I get up ahead of him and I start cutting. And then he comes ahead of me. And now Gus is bringing up the rear and he comes up the bank. Going along, he's got his axe, he's got his sharpening block. And he looks and he sees this nose of brush sticking out of that nice straight edge. He stops, shakes his head, takes his cap off, wipes his brow, sets his sharpening block down, takes his axe and strides over to this little nose of brush that's sticking out and starts wailing on it. You can tell he's mad, and he's going to give Herbert absolute shit. But he wants to get through the day. All of a sudden, Gus goes, "Ow!" And he throws his axe in the air, takes his cap, starts waving his cap around, and running back down the river towards where the boats are. I mean, he's actually stepping through that area that we've cleaned, and he's going. And he gets, because there's a little path that goes from the bank down to where the boats are tied up. He runs down that path and he jumps in the river. Ow, 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 ow. And submerges himself. And then he comes up by the boat, looks around. Well, what had happened was Herbert, when he was brushing there, he came across this bald-faced hornet's nest.
Ouch.
What was hanging in the alder tree or whatever it was he was working around. And, you know, he thought, well, what I'll do is I'll just leave this here and see what Gus thinks about it when he comes along.
So he basically left a booby trap.
He did. He set a booby trap for Gus.
Did he work with Gus again, or was that?
Oh, yeah, no. But when we got back to camp, Gus was pissed off. He wasn't talking to anybody.
Was his face all like knotted up with stings? Because people like, if you haven't ever seen a bald-faced hornet, they're like a badass creature. They're like,
and they sting and bite. And they're probably about the size of your thumb.
Yeah, they're huge. They're not quite murder hornets, but they're getting close. Yeah,
they're getting close. Yeah, no, he had little bumps and lumps all over his face, and he was bald-headed, so on his head as well. He was pretty thoroughly stung up. Now, the good news is he didn't have any kind of an allergic reaction to the stings.
Yeah, because it ain't like you're getting an EpiPen in 1970 on the sticky. Yeah.
And so he went into his cabin, and he wasn't talking to anybody. And he fixed dinner because that was his gig. He liked to do that. And he, I think, we probably had typical dinner was, some canned beans, canned meat, like click.
Like spam or click or something.
Yeah,
Is it like
click. There was one called click.
That's like that's the low rent spam.
There's another one called prem.
Prem. That's what you're getting if you're like. Is there any one of those high society like canned meat? Is there one that like the
bully beef?
Bully beef. That's the high society canned meat.
Yeah. Anyhow, we had accompanied with a pilot biscuit.
A pilot biscuit.
Which is kind of a hardtack sort of biscuit.
Okay, so you're really eating like rations, basically.
This was very much like that. And that night there was nothing. Gus didn't put anything fancy on. There was nothing to accompany it. And then after we were done eating, and did the dishes, then Herbert and I went back to our tent. And by now it's probably 7 o'clock or so. And at 8 o'clock, Gus always had mug up.
Okay.
Which was you went back to his cabin, you have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And Dad's cookies that came in these little cello packs of 6 cookies, which Gus would cut in half. So now you had 3 cookies. So we went for mug up, and we each got 1 cookie.
That was the punishment. Instead of 3, you got 1 cookie.
Yeah.
So that's the story of Gus Adamson. Yeah, I mean I knew in essence or sense that human being was. I don't know if I ever knew him or I would have been a very small child, but especially with the Facebook page, Telegraph Creek people came out, and he was mentioned. Somebody posted a photo of him, and I knew I'd seen him, like even if it was with an infant's eyes, right? Like I recognized that human being. And he was a Popeye. He was like Popeye, and he was like a bad, he was a man of that place and that time, succeeding. I said that's a hard dude. Like,
he was tough.
Tough, like exactly. Gets stung the fuck up by murder hornets, basically. And okay, I'm going to punish you. You're going to know that I disapprove of what happened. You only get one cookie.
Yeah. So it was back to the tent. Laid down on the bunk, read my Louis L'Amour, and then on to the next day. Anyway, that's, if I thought about it, I could come up with all kinds of vignettes of sort of a day in the life of a snagging crew. But
well, it's just epic work, right? So,
one last thing I would say.
Okay.
Herbert Hawkins, he would come to the beginning of the shift. So he would show
How long were the shifts?
2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah. Beginning of the shift, he would show up, and he would have been drinking. And he would have been like drinking Telegraph Creek style, which means
like every day, all day.
Yeah. And he looked, his face was all kind of twisted up and ugly. By the time we'd been down the river a couple of weeks, he was a handsome man.
Wow.
I mean, you never, if you hadn't been with him, you wouldn't know it was the same guy. I mean, honest to God, I've never seen such a transformation. It's a kind of a testament to how fucked up alcohol can be, too, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was pretty fucked. That's why you didn't drink for years, because you moved into that space where alcohol was like such a horrible poison, right? Like, I mean, people around you were, Yeah, so that would be like 71, 72, 72, 70, yeah.
Yeah, 72.
Summer of 72.
Yeah.
Summer of 72. So that's good work. Yeah, I think it's, really important to, especially when you're a young man, to do epic shit like that, right? It kind of sets your understanding of the world.
Yeah, and it teaches you how to work hard.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Yeah. I mean, I already kind of knew, but I really knew after that experience. I guess the one last story I'll share with you right now, because we'll come back and have some other stories, but it's the same year, but now it's wintertime. Again, you haven't come into this world, so it's your mother and your brother.
So 72, I'm just about to come into the world, or is this 71 winter of?
This would have been...
Had to be 71.
71, yeah.
Yeah, because I came in 72, so I was there for winter 72, shitting, vomiting, screaming, yelling, endearing myself.
Yeah. So we're living in a little tiny cabin in downtown Telegraph Creek. Probably the inside was, I would say, it's probably 12 feet by 14 feet or something. It was tiny. It had enough room for a stove and a bed.
The size of my living room, kind of.
Yeah, yeah. And we're living in this. This is because we have a plan, and our plan is to go out to Glenora in the spring and to build a cabin and a homestead there. So
you already had your eyes on that spot.
Yeah, we did. And the Culvers told us about it and said that would be a good place. You could grow a garden there and so forth. But here we are. We're in downtown Telegraph Creek. We're in this tiny little cabin. And one of the guys that I'd gotten to know in town was a young man named Eugene Adzurza. And he said, I'm going to take you and we'll go moose hunting. Now, I had a pair of snowshoes that I had built by Eddie Frank. And these were long, shovel-nosed Taltan snowshoes. They were made with spruce saplings and little birch cross pieces, and laced with what they call babiche, which is rawhide moose skin.
Yeah, so moose skin, birch, and
spruce. And Eddie was a master snowshoe maker. He built this pair of snowshoes. You attached them to your feet with a candle wick.
Because the wax.
No. It's just wicking. Because you'd make a harness. You'd tie it. It was just I don't think I could do one now. I'd have to really think about it. But you take that wicking and you tie it to the frame of the shoe. Then you're wearing moccasins, by the way, not boots or.
Cool. So this is like, we're like seriously like indigenous here.
Yeah.
We're like fully on Taltan hunter,
Yeah.
moccasins, moose skin.
So anyway, I've never been on snowshoes in my life.
Okay.
And Eugene says, well, you'll be okay. And where we are right at the river, there's hardly any snow, and the river's frozen over. So we're going to cross the river and climb up the bank on the other side, and then begin going up. And we're going to a place, and this should have alerted to me what this day was going to be like.
So you're heading kind of like towards Sam Berger's place, type of into that area.
Yeah, and to a place called Mankiller.
Sorry. You're like, oh yeah, man killer. Like, are you the white dude in a horror movie? Like,
So this was a little mountain. They called it Mankiller for obvious reasons. It was steep, and up and up and up and up. But I'm on snowshoes for the first time. Now Eugene, was probably born with a pair of snowshoes on, he's running ahead breaking trail, which is great because there's no way we'd ever gotten there if I was breaking trail. Now breaking trail means you're the first person, and you're stepping on the fresh snow, and you're stamping it down.
so you're actually physically intentionally creating a trail with your.
Yeah.
So he's basically easing your passage.
Yeah.
Without even hesitation. He's just like bump, 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 bump,
Yeah,
bump,
yeah.
bump, bump, yeah. Like no consideration of the amount of fitness that it takes to do that, but that's just because what you do, because it needs to get
That's
done.
what you
right?
do, yeah. And you're either going to do it or you're not. And so
Yeah.
there's no arguing with it.
So he's out pounding the snow for you, and you're following behind. So how quickly did you get the idea of walking in snowshoes? I mean, you're pretty young, very athletic already.
I guess pretty quickly. But, later on, once I was good on snowshoes, I could run with them.
Yeah.
Well, that day I couldn't run with them, but, I was able to keep up, more or less. And we got up towards the top of the mountain, and there's a little swampy area in there. We actually jumped a moose in there. It fucked off before we could get a shot at it. Now, I'm dressed with... I've got a pair of jeans.
Okay.
Got long underwear on. Got a pair of jeans. I've got chaps made out of wool blanket.
Okay.
They're over the jeans. Got the moccasins.
Yeah.
Got a down vest
Okay.
and an anorak. This is all primitive stuff. This isn't like this
Yeah, high-tech,
high-tech modern
Gore-Tex. Yeah, no.
gear you get today, but it worked. It's what you needed.
Yeah.
Anyway, we jumped this moose, and it's getting on, so we're going to have to head back. We're not going to, if we see a moose on the way back, that'll be a bonus, but we didn't. I did have a covey of ptarmigan fly up in front of me, and they're white grouse,
Yes.
and they're in the snow,
Yes.
and you don't see them.
And just all of a sudden,
And
bam.
all of a sudden, like a dozen of them right in front of me. Just about gave me a heart attack. What is this? The end of the world. Anyhow, so we headed back, and it was getting to be a struggle. I was getting worn out. I was really thirsty. And I started doing something that you're not supposed to do. Because without any water, I was eating snow.
Oh, yeah, because it cools you down inside, right? It takes too
Yeah.
much energy to reheat it.
Yeah. And I guess by the time we got back to the river, I was probably kind of hypothermic.
Yeah.
And Eugene was just forging along. It was a real interesting lesson that taught me about, you're doing something with somebody else and they're struggling. Well, you're going to help them out. You're not going to abandon them. But you're not going to fucking baby them either.
Yeah.
Because you got to get from point A to point B, and you got to go, and they're going to follow or not. If they don't follow, you're going to go back and get them. But he was not being mean.
He was just setting the pace that needed to be.
Yeah, that we needed to keep. So we got down to the river, crossed the river, up to the other side, there by the cabin. And was a little porch on the cabin. And I was totally 110% spent.
Yeah.
And I just kind of collapsed there, all covered with snow and wet and cold and hypothermic. And my moccasins were frozen into the harness on the snowshoes. Your mother had to come out and help me get them off and get up, and my pants are frozen, my chaps are frozen. And
but you obviously passed the test, right? That sounds more like he was like going to test this white dude and just going to see if he was good.
I think I passed the test.
Yeah, so that's winning. With that, Patrick has departed the studio. My name's Jeremiah Armstrong. I'd like to say thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for more Telegraph Creek Stories.